October 14th, 1943, 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Captain James Howard gripped his P-51 Mustang's control stick as his formation emerged from cloud cover into crystalline autumn sky. Below, a box formation of B-17 bombers stretched across the horizon, their aluminum fuselages glinting in morning sunlight. Howard's mission was simple in concept, brutally difficult in execution. Keep those bombers alive against Luftwaffe fighters who knew these skies intimately and flew aircraft designed specifically for bomber interception. What Howard and his fellow fighter pilots couldn't yet know was that British engineers had already solved the single most difficult problem in aerial gunnery. A device incorporating spinning gyroscopes, precision gears, and carefully calculated mirrors would soon transform how American pilots engaged enemy aircraft. The Mark 14 gyroscopic gun sight would arrive in American fighter cockpits within months, fundamentally altering the mathematics of air combat and forcing Japanese tacticians to completely reassess their defensive doctrine. The challenge Howard faced that October morning had plagued fighter pilots since the First World War. Hitting a maneuvering target while both aircraft executed violent turns required instantaneous mathematical calculations that human minds struggled to perform accurately. A fighter traveling at 400 miles per hour, attempting to shoot an enemy aircraft maneuvering at 300 miles per hour, had to aim not at where the target was, but where it would be when bullets arrived. Those bullets, leaving gun muzzles at approximately 2,700 feet per second, still required measurable time to reach their target. At 500 yards, that time approached half a second. In that interval, an aircraft in a standard rate turn would move nearly 200 feet. The pilot had to lead the target by that exact amount, adjusting continuously as ranges, angles, and speeds changed, all while pulling G-forces that narrowed vision, grayed peripheral awareness, and made complex trigonometry impossible. The human brain, remarkable as it is, cannot perform these calculations with consistent accuracy under combat stress. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The standard gun sight equipped on American fighters through 1943 offered virtually no assistance with this fundamental problem. The N9 reflector sight, fitted to P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, and early P-51 Mustangs, projected a simple illuminated reticle onto a glass plate mounted in front of the pilot's face. This reticle consisted of a center dot surrounded by a circle, nothing more than a fixed reference point showing where the guns were aimed if the pilot fired while flying perfectly straight and level. During actual combat maneuvering, this fixed reticle became nearly useless for deflection shooting. The pilot had to estimate lead angle entirely through experience, intuition, and guesswork. Talented pilots developed an instinctive feel for deflection shooting after months of practice and dozens of engagements. Many pilots never developed that feel at all, consistently firing behind fleeing targets and wasting ammunition that had traveled 6,000 miles across oceans to reach combat zones. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, flying P-47 Thunderbolts with the 56th Fighter Group, became the top-scoring American ace in the European theater, with 28 confirmed victories. Gabreski had mastered deflection shooting through sheer repetition, natural ability, and hundreds of hours studying enemy aircraft behavior. In post-war interviews preserved in Air Force archives, Gabreski described deflection shooting as an art form requiring the same kind of instinctive understanding that great athletes possess. You couldn't think about the mathematics during combat. You had to feel the geometry, sense the correct lead angle, and fire at the precise instant when instinct and reality aligned. Gabreski's success came from exceptional talent combined with extensive practice. Most pilots lacked Gabreski's gifts. The average Army Air Force pilot arrived in combat theaters with perhaps 300 hours total flight time, maybe 30 hours of gunnery practice against towed targets that flew straight and level. Against maneuvering enemy fighters flown by experienced pilots, these average American aviators struggled to achieve consistent hits. Combat reports from 1943 show that many pilots expended all their ammunition during engagements without scoring a single confirmed kill. Gun camera footage reviewed by training officers revealed the problem clearly. American pilots were firing too far behind maneuvering targets because their mental calculations of required lead were consistently too slow and too conservative. The British Royal Air Force had recognized this fundamental problem early in the war. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, RAF pilots flying Spitfires and Hurricanes faced the same deflection shooting challenges that would later plague American aviators. British scientists at the Royal Aircraft Establishment began developing a solution that seemed almost impossibly ambitious. They proposed building a mechanical computer small enough to fit in a fighter cockpit, rugged enough to withstand combat maneuvering, and accurate enough to calculate deflection angles in real time during high-speed combat. The principle underlying their solution was elegantly simple, though engineering implementation proved extraordinarily complex. Gyroscopes, spinning masses that resist changes in orientation, could measure an aircraft's rate of turn with remarkable precision. When an aircraft turns, gyroscopes inside a gun sight remain pointed in their original direction while the aircraft rotates around them. By measuring this resistance through precision gears and carefully designed linkages, the sight could calculate the aircraft's instantaneous rate of turn. That rate of turn corresponds directly to the lead angle required to hit a target at known range. If the sight knows how fast the fighter is turning and how far away the target is, it can automatically calculate where the pilot must aim to achieve a hit. The sight adjusts the aiming reticle automatically, moving it ahead of the target by precisely the correct amount based on current maneuvering. British engineers at Ferranti Limited began producing the Mark II gyroscopic gun sight in 1941. The device incorporated two independent gyroscopes measuring pitch and yaw, spinning continuously at thousands of revolutions per minute once powered. These gyroscopes, each about the size of a golf ball, contained the secret to solving deflection shooting, the single most difficult aspect of aerial gunnery that had challenged fighter pilots for decades. Royal Air Force pilots using the Mark II gyroscopic sight reported dramatic improvements in accuracy during operational testing. Spitfire pilots who had struggled with deflection shooting suddenly found themselves achieving hits on their first burst. The sight eliminated the need for complex mental calculations, allowing pilots to focus on tactics, situational awareness, and positioning rather than instantaneous geometry. Squadron commanders observed that less experienced pilots achieved combat effectiveness comparable to veterans when equipped with gyroscopic sights. The United States Army Air Force recognized the technology's revolutionary potential immediately upon receiving reports from British operational trials. In early 1942, the Army Air Force contracted Sperry Gyroscope Company to produce American versions of the British sight. Sperry, headquartered in Lake Success, New York, was already producing gyroscopic equipment for bomb sights, autopilots, and naval fire control systems. Adding fighter gun sights to their production line represented a natural extension of existing capabilities. Sperry's engineers examined British Mark II sights provided by the Royal Air Force and began adapting the design for American manufacturing techniques and fighter cockpit integration. The American version, designated K-14, incorporated the same fundamental gyroscopic principles as the British original, while modifying mechanical details to suit American production facilities and standardized components. Development proceeded through 1942 and into 1943, with extensive testing at Wright Field in Ohio and at gunnery ranges where pilots could evaluate the sight against live targets. The K-14 gun sight was substantially larger and heavier than the simple reflector sight it was designed to replace. Where the N9 reflector sight was a compact unit weighing perhaps 5 pounds, the complete K-14 system weighed nearly 15 pounds and required significant cockpit modifications to accommodate its bulk. The housing alone measured approximately 10 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches deep, occupying valuable space in already cramped fighter cockpits. Sperry engineers explained that this bulk was unavoidable. Inside the housing were two independent gyroscopes, each spinning at approximately 20,000 revolutions per minute when operational. These gyroscopes had to be mounted in precision gimbals that allowed them to maintain orientation regardless of aircraft maneuvering. The mechanical linkages connecting gyroscope movement to reticle positioning required dozens of precision-machined gears, each manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The optical system incorporated multiple mirrors and lenses to project the computed aiming point onto the combining glass, where pilots could see it superimposed on the actual target. Every component had to function reliably, under sustained high-G maneuvering, temperature extremes from -40 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude to +120 degrees on tropical airfields, and vibration levels that would destroy commercial-grade instruments within hours. The K-14's design incorporated important lessons learned from British combat experience with the Mark II. The sight featured a combining glass positioned directly in the pilot's line of sight when looking forward through the windscreen. On this glass, the sight projected two distinct elements. A fixed reference cross showed where the aircraft's guns were actually pointed, providing orientation reference. The gyroscopically stabilized reticle, consisting of a center dot surrounded by 6 diamond-shaped ranging pips, showed the computed aiming point. As the pilot maneuvered to track a target, this computed reticle automatically positioned itself ahead of the enemy aircraft by exactly the correct lead angle, based on the fighter's current rate of turn. The pilot's operational procedure simplified dramatically compared to reflector sight operation, though it still required specific training to master. First, the pilot adjusted a range control, typically mounted on the throttle quadrant, to set target wingspan. The sight incorporated preset values for common enemy aircraft types. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 had a wingspan of approximately 32 feet. A Focke-Wulf 190 measured 34 feet 9 inches. Japanese Zeros spanned 36 feet for standard variants. With target wingspan selected, the pilot adjusted the range control to expand or contract the diamond-shaped pips around the center dot until they bracketed the target's apparent wingspan as seen through the sight. This ranging process mechanically informed the sight's ballistic computer how far away the target was, and therefore how much bullet drop and time of flight to compensate for in its calculations. With range and wingspan properly set, the gyroscopes took over automatically. As the pilot maneuvered his fighter to track the target, the moving reticle positioned itself ahead of the enemy aircraft by the mathematically correct lead angle for the current turn rate, range, and ballistic properties of the ammunition. The pilot simply had to place that computed reticle on the target and press the trigger. If range was set correctly and the pilot maintained steady tracking, bullets would arrive precisely where the sight predicted, regardless of how complex the maneuvering involved. This represented a fundamental transformation of aerial gunnery from art to science, from instinct to calculation, from years of experience compressed into mechanical precision. Production of K-14 gunsights began in earnest during spring of 1944 at Sperry's expanded facilities. The company employed over 20,000 workers at peak wartime production, turning out gyroscopic gunsights alongside bomb sights for B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, fire control systems for naval vessels, and navigational equipment for cargo aircraft. Manufacturing precision gyroscopic instruments at such scale tested American industrial capacity. Each K-14 required dozens of components machined to exacting specifications. The gyroscopes themselves were masterpieces of miniaturization and precision engineering. The gyroscope rotors, spinning at 20,000 revolutions per minute, had to be perfectly balanced. Any imbalance, even measured in fractions of a gram, would create vibration that destroyed bearings within hours. The bearings themselves used specialized steel alloys and required hand-fitting by skilled technicians who verified smooth rotation before assembly. Quality control procedures tested each completed sight extensively before delivery to operational units. Test stands at Sperry's facility simulated aircraft maneuvering by rotating the sights through programmed sequences of pitch and yaw movements, while technicians verified that computed deflection angles matched predicted values across a range of turn rates and simulated target ranges. Sites that failed these rigorous tests were returned to production lines for adjustment or complete rebuilding. The manufacturing challenge extended beyond simply producing the sights. The devices had to be produced in sufficient quantities to equip thousands of fighters across multiple theaters, while maintaining quality standards necessary for precision instruments that pilots would depend on during life or death combat. Sperry ramped up production throughout 1944, training workers in specialized skills required for optical assembly, precision mechanical work, and gyroscope balancing. The Army Air Force initially prioritized European theater operations for K-14 distribution, P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts escorting heavy bombers over Germany received K-14 installations, beginning in August 1944. Fighter groups began receiving modified aircraft equipped with the new sights during late summer and early fall, with pilots undergoing abbreviated training on proper employment techniques. The training emphasized practical proficiency rather than deep understanding of gyroscopic physics. Pilots needed to know how to operate the sight effectively, not how to design one. Ground school instruction covered basic principles, sight limitations, and step-by-step procedures for ranging targets and interpreting reticle indications. Flight training included practice intercepts against other friendly aircraft serving as targets, allowing pilots to experience how the sight behaved during actual tracking. Instructors particularly emphasized the importance of smooth, steady tracking. The gyroscopes required consistent turn rates to calculate accurate deflection. If a pilot executed sudden, jerky control inputs, the gyroscopes would momentarily lose accuracy as they adjusted to rapidly changing rates. Experienced pilots learned to approach deflection, shots with smooth, progressive turns that allowed the sight to stabilize and provide accurate solutions. The K-14's arrival in European combat theaters during fall 1944 coincided with intensified Luftwaffe resistance as German fighters defended their homeland from daylight bomber raids. American pilots, equipped with gyroscopic sights, began reporting improved combat effectiveness almost immediately. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, noted in reports preserved in Air Force Historical Research Agency archives that pilots who had struggled to achieve consistent kills with reflector sights were suddenly scoring victories with their initial bursts when using K-14-equipped P-51 seconds. The difference was most apparent during bomber escort missions, where maintaining formation discipline often prevented pilots from maneuvering into ideal 6 o'clock attack positions directly behind enemy fighters. The K-14's ability to calculate accurate deflection from any angle transformed these constrained engagements from difficult low-percentage shots into viable opportunities. Pilots no longer needed to maneuver into perfect tail chase positions. They could engage from high deflection angles that would have been nearly impossible with reflector sights. Combat reports from late 1944 document numerous instances where American pilots achieved kills during their first firing pass, a level of first-shot success that had been uncommon with earlier sighting systems. Gun camera footage showed the dramatic difference. Where earlier footage often showed streams of tracer fire passing behind maneuvering targets, K-14-equipped pilots produced gun camera film showing bullets tracking directly through target aircraft, often achieving catastrophic structural damage or immediate fires. While the European theater received initial priority for K-14 distribution, the Pacific theater's needs were equally urgent. The Navy and Marine Corps had contracted with Sperry for their own version of the gyroscopic sight, designated Mark 18. This naval variant incorporated the same fundamental gyroscopic principles as the Army's K-14, while adapting mechanical details for naval fighter cockpits and incorporating waterproofing modifications necessary for carrier operations. F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs began receiving Mark 18 installations during late 1944 and early 1945. Marine fighter squadrons preparing for carrier operations received priority, as these units would face the most challenging deflection shooting scenarios during bomber escort and fleet defense missions. VMF 124 and VMF 213, the first Marine squadrons assigned to fleet carriers, received Mark 18-equipped Corsairs during training at Naval Air Station Santa Barbara in late 1944. Lieutenant Robert McClurg, flying with the reformed VMF 214, received his Mark 18-equipped Corsair in early 1945. McClurg had scored several victories during 1944 using standard reflector sights, relying on natural ability and extensive practice to master deflection shooting. In letters to his family, later preserved in Marine Corps archives, McClurg wrote that the Mark 18 represented the difference between skilled guesswork and mechanical certainty. The device compressed years of deflection shooting experience into a few hours of training, he noted, making competent shooters out of pilots who might never have developed the instinctive feel required with reflector sights. Japanese naval aviation intelligence first became aware of advanced American gunsight technology in late 1944 through analysis of recovered aircraft wreckage and interrogation of captured documents. Technical specifications extracted from damaged F-6F Hellcats shot down during Philippines campaign operations revealed that Americans had deployed fire control systems incorporating gyroscopic deflection computation. Japanese technical officers examining this intelligence understood immediately that the implications were profound and deeply troubling. Any technological advantage that improved shooting accuracy represented a significant tactical problem, but gyroscopic gun sights eliminated human calculation error almost entirely. The mathematical precision of gyroscopes spinning thousands of times per minute, coupled with mechanical computers calculating deflection based on instantaneous turn rates, could not be matched by human reflexes, regardless of pilot experience or training quality. Japanese fighters had survived against numerically superior American forces, partly by exploiting their superior low-speed maneuverability. Zero fighters and later models like the A6M5 could outturn most American fighters at combat speeds, forcing American pilots into difficult high-deflection shots where human calculation errors provided Japanese pilots some margin of survival. Against Mark 18-equipped aircraft, that margin vanished almost completely. Any American pilot who could track a Japanese fighter long enough to set proper range would score hits regardless of how violently the Japanese pilot maneuvered. The gyroscopic sight would calculate correct lead automatically, faster and more accurately than any human mind. Japanese tactical doctrine, built around maneuverability advantages, suddenly faced technological obsolescence. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Tactical modifications were ordered across Japanese naval aviation units during early 1945. Japanese fighters were instructed to avoid prolonged turning engagements with American fighters at all costs. New doctrine emphasized hit-and-run attacks, diving from altitude advantage to make a single high-speed pass before extending away at maximum velocity. This tactical shift acknowledged an uncomfortable strategic reality that Japanese planners could no longer ignore. Japanese pilots could no longer rely on maneuverability alone to survive against technologically superior American fire control systems. The superior training that had characterized Japanese naval aviation in 1941 and 1942 had been systematically destroyed through attrition. By 1945, Japanese pilot quality had declined precipitously, as experienced aviators were killed faster than training programs could replace them with adequately prepared replacements. Now, even the tactical advantages that Japanese aircraft designs provided were being negated by American technology. The introduction of gyroscopic gun sights into Pacific combat operations coincided with the final year of intensive carrier warfare. January 1945 brought Operation Gratitude, American carrier strikes against Formosa and the South China coast. Marine Corsair squadrons operating from fleet carriers flew combat air patrol, bomber escort, and strike missions with their new Mark 18 sights. Pilots engaging Japanese interceptors during these operations reported dramatically improved hit rates compared to their previous experiences using reflector sights. Combat action reports from January and February 1945, preserved in Naval History and Heritage Command archives, document numerous instances where pilots achieved kills with their initial firing burst. This level of first-pass lethality had been exceptional with reflector sights. With gyroscopic sights, it became increasingly common among pilots who properly employed the ranging and tracking procedures. The difference was particularly noticeable during complex multiplane engagements, where pilots had to rapidly shift between multiple targets. With reflector sights, engaging a second target after destroying the first required the pilot to mentally reset, re-evaluate geometry, and calculate new deflection angles from scratch. With gyroscopic sights, the pilot simply had to acquire the new target, adjust range using the throttle-mounted control, and allow the gyroscopes to stabilize. The sight performed all necessary calculations automatically. This capability to engage multiple targets in rapid succession multiplied the effective combat power of individual fighters. Where a skilled pilot with a reflector sight might achieve 1 kill per engagement before exhausting ammunition or losing tactical position, a pilot with a gyroscopic sight could potentially engage 2 or 3 targets during the same combat sequence, conserving ammunition through first burst kills and maintaining energy state for subsequent attacks. February 1945 brought the invasion of Iwo Jima, where Marine Corsairs provided continuous air cover for the assault force. Multiple Marine squadrons flew from escort carriers, maintaining combat air patrols over the invasion fleet and supporting ground operations with close air support strikes. The Mark 18 equipped aircraft demonstrated their effectiveness during defensive missions against Japanese air attacks attempting to strike the invasion fleet. Pilots intercepting incoming raids consistently achieved kills at ranges and deflection angles that would have been extremely difficult with reflector sights. The gyroscopic sight's automatic deflection calculation allowed pilots to engage targets from non-ideal positions, firing effectively even when tactical circumstances prevented perfect stern attacks. Combat air patrol doctrine emphasized intercepting raids as far from the fleet as possible, which often meant engaging enemy aircraft during their approach rather than waiting for perfect geometric positioning. March 1945 saw continuation of carrier operations against the Japanese home islands as American naval forces tightened the blockade and prepared for the anticipated invasion of Japan itself. Task Force 58, the fast carrier force, struck airfields throughout southern Japan, destroying aircraft on the ground and engaging aerial opposition with increasing effectiveness. The cumulative impact of American technological advantages, including gyroscopic gun sights, increasingly sophisticated radar direction, improved tactics developed through 3 years of combat experience, and overwhelming numerical superiority, created an aerial combat environment where Japanese forces faced systematically insurmountable odds. April 1945 brought Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa. This campaign witnessed the most intensive kamikaze attacks of the entire war, with Japanese forces throwing thousands of aircraft against the American fleet in desperate attempts to halt the invasion through sheer attrition. Marine Corsairs equipped with Mark 18 sights played crucial roles in defending against these attacks, flying endless combat air patrols from both fleet carriers and escort carriers positioned around Okinawa. The gyroscopic sight proved particularly effective against kamikaze aircraft, which typically flew relatively predictable attack profiles as they approached their targets. Unlike conventional air combat where both aircraft maneuvered violently, kamikaze pilots focused on reaching their target ships rather than evading defensive fire. This made range estimation straightforward and allowed defending fighters to achieve high percentage deflection shots even when approaching from angles that would have been difficult with reflector sights. Combat air patrol missions during April through June 1945 resulted in hundreds of Japanese aircraft destroyed before they could reach the fleet. While precise statistics specifically attributing kills to Mark 18 equipped aircraft versus those still using reflector sights are not comprehensively documented in declassified operational records, squadron after-action reports consistently noted improved combat effectiveness among units that had received gyroscopic sights. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots who survived encounters with gyroscopic sight-equipped American fighters extended beyond simple tactical disadvantage. The experience of being hit consistently regardless of evasive maneuvering, of watching tracer fire curve through the air with seemingly unnatural accuracy, created a sense of technological helplessness that traditional training had not prepared them for. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese aviators, conducted during the 1950s and 60s by American and Japanese military historians, revealed that many identified advanced American fire control systems as among the most demoralizing technologies they faced. The certainty of being hit once an American pilot achieved a tracking solution eliminated the hope that had sustained Japanese fighter pilots through increasingly desperate circumstances throughout the final year of the war. Maneuverability could no longer save them. Years of training and combat experience provided no meaningful advantage against mechanical computers that calculated deflection faster and more accurately than human minds. The only reliable escape was to avoid engagement entirely, a tactical impossibility when defending against attacking bombers or protecting Japanese surface forces from American strikes. The Mark 18's technical operation represented a remarkable achievement in mechanical computing, particularly considering the technology available in 1944. The system operated without any electronics whatsoever, using purely mechanical linkages, precision gears, and carefully designed mirrors to perform calculations that would challenge a trained mathematician with pencil and paper. The gyroscopes spun continuously once the sight received electrical power from the aircraft's electrical system, maintaining their orientation in space through conservation of angular momentum, a fundamental principle of physics that makes gyroscopes resistant to changes in their rotational axis. As the aircraft maneuvered, executing turns, climbs, or descents, the gyroscope housings rotated relative to the stable gyroscope rotors. Precision gears measured this relative motion with remarkable accuracy, translating rotational displacement into mechanical movement that repositioned mirrors within the optical system. These mirrors, in turn, moved the projected aiming reticle on the combining glass, positioning it ahead of the target by the mathematically correct amount based on current turn rate, set range, and known ballistic properties of the ammunition. The entire mechanical computer system operated with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Components manufactured even slightly outside specification would cause the sight to provide inaccurate deflection solutions, potentially causing pilots to miss targets or worse, to lose confidence in the sight's accuracy. Sperry's production facilities represented the pinnacle of American precision manufacturing capability in 1944. Each Mark 18 and K-14 required dozens of individual components machined to exacting specifications using the most advanced machine tools available. The gyroscopes themselves incorporated bearings that had to operate smoothly under sustained high-G maneuvering without binding, skipping, or developing excessive friction that would slow the rotors and introduce calculation errors. Quality control procedures at Sperry's manufacturing facilities were extraordinarily rigorous. Each site underwent extensive testing before being approved for delivery to operational units. Test stands simulated aircraft maneuvering by rotating sights through programmed sequences, while technicians verified that computed deflection angles matched theoretical predictions across ranges of turn rates and simulated target distances. The integration of gyroscopic sights into fighter cockpits required careful attention to human factors and ergonomics. The sight had to be positioned where pilots could easily view it while maintaining situational awareness of the broader tactical environment. Pilots needed to see both the sight's reticle and the actual target simultaneously, which required precise positioning of the combining glass at the correct distance and angle from the pilot's normal head position. The range adjustment control, typically integrated into the throttle lever assembly, had to be accessible and intuitive to operate without requiring pilots to remove their hands from primary flight controls or divert significant attention from tactical decision-making. Engineers worked extensively with experienced combat pilots during development to refine control placement and operational procedures, incorporating feedback about what worked smoothly and what created difficulties during high-stress combat maneuvering. The result was a system that pilots could operate almost intuitively after relatively brief training, without needing to consciously think through each step during the chaos of actual combat. Training programs developed for gyroscopic sight employment emphasized understanding what the sight was displaying and how to interpret its indications, rather than teaching the underlying mathematics or engineering principles. Pilots learned to recognize when the sight had stabilized after violent maneuvers, indicated by the computed reticle settling into steady position relative to the target. They learned when to trust the sight's solution and when human judgment should override mechanical calculations. They practiced quickly setting range using the diamond-shaped ranging pips, developing the hand-eye coordination necessary to bracket targets accurately while maintaining tactical awareness. Ground school instruction covered the sight's basic operating principles without overwhelming pilots with mathematical theory they didn't need for effective employment. The instructional goal was practical combat, proficiency, not engineering expertise. Flight training included extensive practice intercepts against friendly aircraft serving as targets, allowing pilots to experience how the sight behaved during various types of tracking situations under controlled conditions before facing actual combat. Instructors particularly emphasized the importance of smooth, progressive tracking, since erratic or jerky maneuvering caused the gyroscopes to momentarily lose accuracy as they adjusted to rapidly changing turn rates. The sight worked optimally when pilots maintained steady pursuit curves, allowing the gyroscopes to measure consistent angular rates and provide stable deflection solutions. Training also comprehensively covered the sight's limitations, which were significant despite its revolutionary capabilities. The gyroscopes required several seconds to stabilize after extremely violent maneuvers. If a pilot executed a sudden reversal, yanking the aircraft through a maximum rate turn in the opposite direction, the sight's reticle would lag briefly before reacquiring accurate deflection information as the gyroscopes adjusted to the new flight condition. Experienced pilots learned to anticipate these limitations, timing their attacks to coincide with periods when the sight had achieved stable operation following major maneuvering changes. They learned to recognize the visual indications that the sight had stabilized and was providing accurate solutions versus moments when the reticle position was still adjusting and might not be trustworthy. Despite these minor limitations, which any mechanical system operating under extreme conditions would inevitably possess, the Mark 18 and K-14 represented quantum leaps forward in fire control technology. Pilots who had struggled with deflection shooting using reflector sights found themselves achieving hits with regularity that had previously seemed impossible except for naturally gifted aviators. The sight didn't make aerial combat easy or eliminate danger. Combat remained intensely demanding, requiring tactical judgment, situational awareness, energy management, and skilled flying. But the actual mechanics of shooting, the precise moment when trigger pressure met target solution, had become more predictable, more reliable, and significantly more lethal for pilots who properly employed the technology. The cumulative impact of gyroscopic gunsights on American fighter operations during 1945 is difficult to quantify with absolute precision from available declassified records. Official statistics document that American fighters achieved increasingly favorable kill ratios throughout the final year of the Pacific War, but these aggregate figures represent combined results of multiple factors working synergistically. Improved pilot training, better tactics developed through years of combat experience, increasing American numerical superiority as Japanese pilot quality declined through attrition, growing American advantages in aircraft performance as new models entered service, and the introduction of gyroscopic sights all contributed simultaneously to improved combat effectiveness. Separating the specific contribution of gunsight technology from these other factors would require access to detailed combat action reports, with precise documentation of which aircraft carried which sight types during specific engagements, data that remains either classified or simply was never systematically collected in sufficient detail for comprehensive statistical analysis. What can be definitively documented is the consistent testimony of pilots who flew combat missions with both sight types at different points during their operational tours. These pilots uniformly reported that gyroscopic sights made deflection shooting substantially more reliable and significantly less dependent on natural ability or years of practice. Squadron commanders noted that less experienced pilots achieved combat effectiveness, comparable to veterans when equipped with gyroscopic sights, a pattern documented in operational reports from multiple fighter groups. The Mark 18 and K-14 programs represented American technological and industrial capability operating at extraordinarily high levels. The devices incorporated cutting-edge gyroscopic technology, precision optics, and mechanical computing, all packaged in forms that could withstand the brutal environment of combat aviation, including sustained high-G maneuvering, extreme temperature variations, intense vibration, and occasional combat damage. These sophisticated instruments were manufactured in quantities sufficient to equip thousands of aircraft across global theaters, distributed through complex supply chains spanning oceans and continents, installed in diverse aircraft types with varying cockpit configurations, and maintained in forward areas by ground crews and technicians working under primitive field conditions, often lacking ideal facilities or specialized equipment. The programs succeeded not because of any single brilliant innovation, though the gyroscopic principles were indeed brilliant, but because entire systems functioned effectively from scientific research through engineering development, mass production, global logistics, field installation, pilot training, and operational employment. British scientists identified the fundamental principles and developed initial working prototypes. American engineers adapted these British designs for mass production using American manufacturing techniques and standardized components. American industry manufactured the units in volume using precision machining capabilities, developed through decades of industrial advancement. American military logistics delivered completed sites where they were needed across multiple theaters simultaneously, maintaining supply lines that stretched halfway around the world. This systematic approach to military technology development and deployment characterized American war production across numerous weapon systems and represented advantages that no other nation could match during World War II. The ability to move seamlessly from laboratory prototype to mass-produced operational equipment, deployed globally within 18 to 24 months, demonstrated industrial and organizational capabilities that proved as decisive as any individual technological breakthrough. The Japanese perspective on gyroscopic gun sights and similar Allied fire control technologies evolved significantly during post-war decades as former Imperial Japanese Navy aviators published memoirs, participated in historical conferences, and contributed to military analyses examining why Japan lost the Pacific War. The nearly universal conclusion among surviving Japanese pilots was that American fire control technology, combined with overwhelming numerical superiority and superior logistics, had rendered Japanese tactical doctrine increasingly ineffective by late 1944 and essentially obsolete by early 1945. The maneuverable fighter aircraft, emphasizing low-speed turning performance and piloted by well-trained aviators using traditional deflection shooting techniques, could not compete effectively against aircraft equipped with systems that calculated deflection automatically with mechanical precision. This represented a fundamental shift in the nature of aerial combat that Japanese military planners had failed to anticipate or adequately respond to during the war. Japanese post-war aviation development, beginning with the establishment of the Japan Self-Defense Force during the 1950s, reflected these painful lessons learned at tremendous cost. Japanese military aviation doctrine emphasized advanced avionics and sophisticated weapons systems over pure aircraft maneuverability. The pilots who had survived combat against gyroscopic sight-equipped American fighters understood viscerally that future aerial Akara warfare would be decided primarily by technology and systems integration rather than individual pilot skill alone. The F-4U Corsair itself, the primary carrier of Mark 18 sights in Marine Corps service, continued operational use long after World War II ended. Marine squadrons flew F-4Us extensively during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, providing close air support for ground forces, flying interdiction missions against North Korean and Chinese supply lines, and occasionally engaging enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. Many of these Korean War Corsairs retained their Mark 18 gyroscopic sights throughout their service lives. The revolutionary technology of 1944 had become standard, unremarkable equipment by 1950. This rapid normalization of technological sophistication characterized the post-war era across military aviation. Capabilities that would have seemed almost magical in 1940 were routine by 1950 and obsolete by 1960. The transformation of aerial gunnery from instinctive art to calculated science, dramatically accelerated by gyroscopic sight introduction, reached its logical conclusion with guided air-to-air missiles that required no pilot aiming whatsoever. Missiles, first deployed operationally during the 1950s, eliminated even the requirement that pilots maneuver their aircraft to point weapons at targets. The progression from simple reflector sights to gyroscopic sights to radar-guided missiles occurred in less than 20 years, a pace of technological change unprecedented in military aviation history and reflective of the broader acceleration of military technology during and after World War II. By the time American pilots flew combat missions over Vietnam during the 1960s, the fundamental gyroscopic principles pioneered by the Mark 18 had been incorporated into far more sophisticated fire control computers. These systems integrated radar ranging, automatic lead computation, complex ballistic calculations accounting for altitude and airspeed, and even target identification, all unified into packages that bore little superficial resemblance to the mechanical computers of 1944. Yet the fundamental operating principle remained essentially identical to what the Mark 18 had pioneered 2 decades earlier. Measure the platform's motion using gyroscopes or equivalent inertial sensors, calculate required lead angle based on measured motion and known target parameters, and present that computed solution to the pilot in a form that enabled accurate shooting with minimal mental calculation required. The statistical record of World War II fighter operations provides essential context for understanding gyroscopic gunsights' role in aerial combat. American fighters across all theaters flew hundreds of thousands of sorties against Axis forces from 1942 through 1945. They achieved increasingly favorable kill ratios that established American fighters among the war's most successful, measured both by absolute victories and by exchange ratios against enemy aircraft. This overall success resulted from multiple factors working in combination rather than any single technological advantage. American fighters generally possessed speed advantages over Japanese opponents, allowing pilots significant control over engagement geometry, choosing when to fight and when to disengage based on tactical circumstances. Rugged construction meant American fighters could absorb battle damage that would have destroyed lighter enemy aircraft, allowing pilots to survive hits and return to base for repairs. Heavy armament, typically 6 or 8 50 caliber machine guns, delivered overwhelming firepower when bullets connected with targets, often achieving catastrophic damage with relatively brief firing bursts. Superior training as the war progressed gave American pilots significant advantages in tactical decision-making, situational awareness, and basic flying skills compared to increasingly poorly trained Japanese replacements. Overwhelming numerical superiority, particularly by 1944 and 1945, allowed American forces to achieve local superiority in virtually any engagement, overwhelming Japanese defenders through sheer numbers, even when individual Japanese pilots possessed superior skills. Gyroscopic gunsights amplified these existing advantages by making it substantially easier to deliver concentrated firepower accurately. The sights didn't create American fighter superiority from nothing, but they meaningfully enhanced what were already formidable weapon systems operating as parts of integrated air combat capabilities. Pilot quality remained absolutely crucial despite technological assistance. Gyroscopic sights helped pilots shoot accurately, but they provided no assistance with tactics, situational awareness, energy management, or split-second judgment calls that determined survival in combat. These critical skills still required extensive training and actual combat experience to develop fully. What gyroscopic sights accomplished was compressing the learning curve for one specific skill component, deflection shooting, that had previously required months or years of practice to master. By automating the mathematical calculations, the sights allowed pilots to focus mental resources on higher-level tactical thinking rather than instantaneous geometric computations. The broader historical context reveals that gyroscopic gunsights were one component of comprehensive American technological superiority that characterized the Pacific War's final years. Radar systems provided early warning of Japanese attacks and enabled precise intercept control. Radio communications allowed coordinated operations across dozens of aircraft simultaneously. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells created defensive envelopes around ships that devastated Japanese kamikaze attacks. Each technology individually provided measurable advantages. Together, operating synergistically, they created an integrated system that Japanese forces simply could not match, given their limited industrial base, constrained resource access, and deteriorating training programs. Gyroscopic gunsights fit naturally into this larger pattern of technological superiority. They weren't wonder weapons that single-handedly won the air war through revolutionary capability alone. They were practical improvements in fire control that made already effective aircraft measurably more effective. Their contribution was incremental rather than revolutionary when considered in isolation, but that incremental improvement multiplied across thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of combat engagements produced significant cumulative effects on combat outcomes. The legacy of Mark 18 and K-14 development extended well beyond their direct combat applications during World War II. The development process required unprecedented collaboration between theoretical scientists, practical engineers, experienced combat pilots, and industrial manufacturers. University physicists informed gyroscope design through deep understanding of rotational dynamics and precision mechanics. Manufacturing engineers solved production challenges related to machining components to unprecedented tolerances and assembling complex mechanisms reliably at scale. Combat pilots provided continuous feedback that drove iterative design improvements and influenced operational procedures. This collaborative approach became a model for future weapons development programs throughout the Cold War and beyond. The procurement process also established important precedents for American military technology acquisition. Rather than insisting on developing entirely new technology from scratch, the United States recognized British innovation and pragmatically adapted proven designs for American production, saving critical development time and avoiding unnecessary risks associated with unproven concepts. This willingness to adopt foreign technology when it offered clear advantages demonstrated practical wisdom that served American military aviation effectively throughout subsequent decades. Pride and not invented here syndrome would have delayed gyroscopic sight deployment by years if American engineers had insisted on developing completely original designs rather than adapting British work. The manufacturing techniques developed specifically for gyroscopic sight production had lasting impacts, extending beyond the particular devices themselves. Sperry's modular assembly processes, where different facilities could produce interchangeable subcomponents that were assembled into complete sights at central locations, enabled massive production volumes that gave American forces decisive technological edges across multiple weapon systems. Similar modular production techniques were subsequently applied to radar systems, aircraft engines, electronic equipment, and eventually guided missiles, creating an industrial base capable of producing complex precision equipment at scales that other nations found impossible to match. This industrial capability proved as strategically important as any individual technology, perhaps more so. The pilots who flew combat missions with gyroscopic sights formed a unique transitional generation, experiencing directly the transformation from instinctive gunnery, requiring years of practice, to technology-assisted combat, where mechanical computers provided accurate solutions within seconds. Many of these pilots continued military careers after World War II, flying jets during the Korean War and serving in staff positions where they shaped tactical doctrine around capabilities that advanced fire control systems provided. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who had become the top American ace in Europe, with 28 victories achieved primarily using reflector sights and natural ability, survived the war and remained in the Air Force. He flew F-86 Sabres during the Korean War, achieving additional victories and demonstrating that his skills translated effectively to jet combat. Gabreski eventually reached the rank of colonel before retirement. His career spanned the complete transformation of aerial warfare, from propeller-driven fighters armed with machine guns and simple sights to supersonic jets carrying guided missiles and sophisticated radar. Gabreski's experience, documented in his memoir and numerous interviews, emphasized that while technology like gyroscopic sights made shooting more reliable, combat effectiveness still depended fundamentally on tactical judgment, situational awareness, and aggressive spirit. Lieutenant Robert McClurg, who flew Mark 18-equipped Corsairs with VMF-214 during 1945, survived the war with multiple confirmed victories. He remained in the Marine Corps through the 1950s and 60s, eventually retiring as a colonel. In retirement, McClurg wrote extensively about the technological transformation he witnessed, emphasizing that while gyroscopic sights made deflection shooting substantially more reliable, they never made aerial combat safe or eliminated danger. The sights removed one critical variable from the complex combat equation, but countless others remained. Altitude management, energy state optimization, situational awareness, tactical positioning, all these factors still determined outcomes. A pilot with a perfect gun sight could still be outmaneuvered, outclimbed, or simply caught unaware by an enemy he never detected. Technology improved effectiveness within engagements but never guaranteed survival. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe. The story of gyroscopic gun sights concludes not with dramatic endings or decisive single battles, but with a gradual evolution into increasingly sophisticated systems as technology advanced. As jet fighters replaced propeller-driven aircraft during the 1950s, new fire control systems incorporating electronic computing replaced mechanical gyroscopic sights. The Mark 18 didn't suddenly fail or become worthless overnight. It simply became progressively outdated as faster aircraft operating at higher altitudes with longer engagement ranges required more sophisticated solutions, incorporating radar ranging and electronic ballistic computers. Some Mark 18 sites remained in service aboard Corsairs flying close air support missions during the Korean War, proving their continued utility even as newer technology emerged. Others were eventually placed in storage as aircraft were retired from operational service, and many were subsequently scrapped as military inventory was reduced during post-war drawdowns. A fortunate few were preserved in museums where they remain today as tangible connections to an era when mechanical computing represented cutting-edge military technology. The Mark 18's legacy lives on not in physical devices gathering dust in museum display cases, but in the fundamental principles they demonstrated and the technological lineage they initiated. Every modern fire control system, regardless of how sophisticated or how thoroughly computerized, traces its intellectual heritage directly back to devices like the Mark 18 that first solved fundamental problems of automated aiming using mechanical computers operating without electronics. The engineers who worked on Mark 18 and K-14 development contributed to knowledge bases that extend far beyond their specific wartime technical achievements. They demonstrated conclusively that complex mathematical calculations could be performed mechanically with sufficient reliability for combat use under extreme conditions. They proved that human-machine interfaces could be designed for intuitive operation under extreme stress by pilots with limited technical training. They showed that sophisticated technology could be manufactured at industrial scale and maintained effectively under primitive field conditions by technicians lacking specialized facilities. These lessons informed decades of subsequent weapons development across multiple domains. The pilots who flew combat missions with gyroscopic sights contributed their own lasting legacy to military aviation. They tested revolutionary technology under actual combat conditions and provided invaluable feedback that refined design and operational procedures. They developed tactics that exploited the site's capabilities while working around their limitations. Most importantly, they proved that humans could effectively partner with automated systems, neither becoming completely dependent on technology nor rejecting it as unnecessary or untrustworthy. This balanced approach to human-machine teaming, where technology augments human capability rather than replacing human judgment entirely, remains profoundly relevant as automation extends into more domains throughout modern military operations and civilian life. The Mark 18 era offers concrete historical examples of how such partnerships can succeed and what factors contribute to effectiveness versus what creates problems. The Mark 18 gyroscopic gun sight deserves historical remembrance not because it was uniquely revolutionary or because it single-handedly changed the Pacific War's outcome through wonder weapon capabilities. It deserves remembrance because it exemplifies the less dramatic but ultimately more historically important work of solving practical problems effectively through systematic engineering, careful manufacturing, and thoughtful operational integration. In an era that often celebrates disruptive breakthrough innovations and revolutionary technologies that supposedly change everything overnight, the Mark 18 reminds us that incremental improvements, when implemented systematically at sufficient scale with proper training and logistics support, often prove more valuable than revolutionary changes that cannot be produced reliably or deployed effectively. The device succeeded because it was practical, reliable, and adequately effective for its intended purpose. These characteristics, while perhaps less glamorous than revolutionary breakthroughs, define technology that actually makes measurable differences in real-world operations, rather than merely impressing observers during controlled demonstrations. The Mark 18 story is ultimately a profoundly human story of people collaboratively solving problems that mattered. Scientists and engineers designed it using principles they understood deeply. Factory workers built it using skills developed through training and practice. Logistics personnel delivered it across vast distances through complex supply networks. Maintenance technicians kept it operational under challenging field conditions. Pilots employed it effectively during life or death combat. Commanders integrated it intelligently into successful operations. Each group contributed essential elements to overall success. Without any single contribution, the entire program would have failed to achieve its objectives. This collaborative nature of technological success deserves particular emphasis in historical analysis. Individual genius and brilliance matter and make important contributions, but organized effort across many individuals, organizations, and institutions matters more for achieving large-scale results. The Mark 18 resulted from thousands of people performing their assigned jobs competently and conscientiously, from designers to machinists to pilots. That collective effort, more than any individual brilliance, determined ultimate outcomes and operational impact. The final assessment of the Mark 18's historical impact must honestly acknowledge both what can be definitively documented from available sources and what remains uncertain due to incomplete records. Official documents confirm that gyroscopic sights were produced in substantial numbers, equipped numerous fighter squadrons during 1944 and 1945 across both European and Pacific theaters, and received consistently favorable evaluations from pilots who employed them operationally. Combat action reports indicate measurably improved accuracy and shorter engagement times among squadrons equipped with gyroscopic sights compared to their previous performance using reflector sights. Pilot testimony from memoirs, interviews, and official reports uniformly describes gyroscopic sights as significant improvements over reflector sights, specifically for deflection shooting, the most difficult aspect of aerial gunnery. What cannot be precisely quantified from available declassified sources is the exact statistical improvement in kill ratios, specifically and exclusively attributable to gunsight technology, versus numerous other factors like pilot experience improvements, tactical doctrine evolution, or declining enemy opposition quality, as Japanese forces were progressively ground down through attrition. Aggregate statistics represent performance across entire wars and include both sight types plus countless other variables. Isolating single variables from such complex systems remains methodologically challenging, even with comprehensive data, which often doesn't exist in sufficient detail for rigorous statistical analysis. What remains abundantly clear from available evidence is that Mark 18 and K-14 gyroscopic sights represented meaningful advances in fire control technology that provided practical, measurable advantages to pilots who employed them operationally. They exemplified American industrial capacity, technological innovation, and systematic problem-solving, operating at high levels of effectiveness. In an era when aerial combat was rapidly transitioning from contests of individual skill to competitions between technological systems, gyroscopic gunsights marked important steps toward the automated weapons systems that would define post-war aviation across both military and eventually civilian applications. The devices succeeded operationally because they worked reliably under brutal combat conditions, because they could be manufactured in quantities sufficient for widespread distribution, and because pilots could operate them effectively without requiring extensive specialized training beyond normal fighter pilot qualification. These practical considerations mattered far more than theoretical elegance or pure engineering sophistication divorced from operational realities. The Mark 18 was designed specifically to solve one particular problem: enabling pilots to hit maneuvering targets more reliably during high-speed combat. It solved that problem well enough to remain in operational service through the Korean War more than 5 years after World War II ended. proving its enduring value through years of continued operational employment under varied combat conditions. For the Corsair pilots who flew combat missions with Mark 18 sights during 1945, the device was simply an effective tool that made extraordinarily difficult jobs measurably easier and safer. It didn't eliminate danger or guarantee survival against determined enemies. It didn't make combat simple or remove the need for courage, skill, and sound tactical judgment, but it meaningfully improved their probability of survival in combat environments where margins between life and death were measured in fractions of seconds and hundredths of inches. In broader technological history, spanning military and civilian applications, the Mark 18 Gyroscopic gunsight stands as a transitional technology bridging distinct eras. It connected the age of instinctive aerial gunnery, where success depended primarily on natural talent and years of practice, to the coming age of radar-guided missiles, and automated fire control, where technology assumed primary responsibility for solving targeting problems. It demonstrated conclusively that machines could perform certain calculations faster and more reliably than even highly trained human minds, a principle that would reshape not just aviation but eventually extend across countless domains far beyond military applications. The pilots who witnessed this technological transformation during their combat service understood they were living through a genuine revolution that would fundamentally and permanently change aerial warfare's essential nature. The Mark 18 was simultaneously an ending and a beginning, representing both the culmination of mechanical fire control, computer development, and the precursor to electronic systems that would follow within a decade. Its legacy lives on in the sophisticated fire control computers of modern aircraft, which are direct descendants, technologically and conceptually, of the spinning gyroscopes that first taught machines to aim weapons accurately without human calculation. The story of how gyroscopic gunsights made fighter pilots far more effective at engaging targets at extreme deflection angles is fundamentally a story of technology meeting operational necessity, of careful engineering meeting brutal combat realities, and of systematic innovation meeting practical implementation challenges. It demonstrates how American industrial capacity and methodical problem-solving transformed aerial warfare in the Pacific theater, one precisely machined gyroscope at a time, teaching a generation of pilots that the future of combat would belong to those who most effectively integrated human judgment with mechanical precision. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.